it was the wrong decision from the first place. Again, this administration has thrown out a plethora of reasons for starting the war, much like they've thrown out a plethora of reasons or metrics they're going to use to decide when to stop it. But there was no reason for this war.
Welcome, everyone, to the Trump Report. I'm Amy Kellogg, and I'm here today with Allan, Eyre, who is a former diplomat in the U.S. State Department. He was a member of the nuclear negotiating team. He is a fluent Farsi speaker and a real Iran expert. So we're going to talk about the war today and Allan's take on things as they stand. Allan, at this point, do you see a way out? Do you see a way forward in terms of de-escalation at all?
Well, theoretically, obviously, yes, but in terms of the Overton window and the realistic options open to both sides, I think that we're far more likely to continue to escalate than to de-escalate. I mean, President Trump said recently that the war is winding down, but then his people supplemented that by saying the U.S. administration originally said 4 to 6 weeks. We're now at week 3, and we're still going with that timeline. And again, the key fact is, as a result of this war, Iran has essentially closed the Strait of Hormuz. And that's what's causing the preponderance of economic pain, not just regionally, but globally. And Iran correctly realizes that's a major pressure point, and it's going to keep that pressure on until it gets what it wants out of this war.
Some people, Allan, have even suggested that Iran at this point is winning the war. Do you think there's anything to that kind of comment?
Well, I don't think war has winners, but certainly both sides have set strategic goals that neither of them can accomplish. So I would say it's more likely to say that the U.S. is losing the war in the sense that President Trump's administration perhaps or probably started this war thinking that there would be a quick win and that by decapitation of leadership and by a massive military assault, they could get Iran to either collapse or come to the table. That is not the case. Anyone who follows Iran with any degree of attention realizes that because they see themselves in an existential battle, as they had said many times, they were going to escalate disproportionately as opposed to proportionally, almost indiscriminately in the region, and that's what they're doing. So I wouldn't say Iran is winning the war because of the massive economic hit they're taking, but certainly the U.S. has bungled this whole war, which it never should have gone into in the first place.
Allan, with some Iranians calling for regime change and some actually welcoming this war, and I don't know how many there are in reality, but there are those, as you know, who've said that they worry that when the bombs stop, they'll be left with this regime if it's not decapitated. Under any circumstances, do you think that there was justification for this war and it's gone badly, or do you think that it was the wrong decision in the first place?
No, it was the wrong decision from the first place. Again, this administration has thrown out a plethora of reasons for starting the war, much like they've thrown out a plethora of reasons or metrics they're going to use to decide when to stop it. But there was no reason for this war. Unfortunately, neither side took negotiations seriously. I think the United States was looking more for capitulation unilaterally from Iran than negotiations. And for Iran's part, they realized that they were facing, because of their lack of strategic deterrence, ongoing military assault from Israel and the United States until they change the strategic equation, which is what they're trying to do now. So this was a thoroughly preventable war. It will have significant, unfortunate and consequences economically, geopolitically, for years, if not decades. And again, much like the Iraq War earlier, it was just a serious blunder, and perhaps shows one of the many consequences of eradicating collective expertise from the U.S. foreign policy apparatus, and then neglecting whatever residual vestigial expertise was there.
Why do you think the United States and Israel went to war? It seems to me, from what I understand, that Iran was not about to make a bomb. And if you take what President Trump said at face value, Iran's nuclear program was all but obliterated. So it seems that stopping the nuclear program, of course, has been an issue for decades now. But I think one of the problems the American public has had with this war from the beginning is that it was never explained properly to the American people. Do you think 3 weeks in we're any close to understanding why this is happening? And if not, do you have any idea about why this is happening?
I have a very good idea why it's happening. Israel sees Iran as an existential enemy. Israel is still responding strategically to the massive shock of the terrorist attack of Hamas on October 7th. And because it had a sympathetic president in President Trump, has decided to, as opposed to seeking peace through negotiation, seeking peace through facts on the ground in Gaza, in the West Bank, and Lebanon, and most importantly, for the purposes of our conversation, in Iran. So Israel is trying to get rid of, to collapse the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's easier than regime change, regime collapse. I don't think Israel really cares if there's a pro-Western regime in Iran. It would be nice for Israel if it did, if there were one. But the essential prerequisite for Israel in terms of strategic goals is making Iran a failed state or a near failed state, so it cannot project power outside its borders. In terms of why the U.S. is doing this, it seems to be the case that President Trump heard the same argument that Prime Minister Netanyahu had made to the U.S. administrations over time for decades and said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Why he thought that? Perhaps, again, he thought there was a situation of the Venezuela model where he could kill the supreme leader and then strike a deal with whoever's left. Obviously, wars are always, not always, but often the result of miscalculation, of focusing on possible upsides and neglecting probable downsides. So this is why I say it was a U.S. miscalculation to go into this war. Again, we have no idea what President Trump was thinking, but whatever he was thinking, it is unlikely he foresaw the current state, even though, as I said, if you follow Iran, it was a probable outcome.
Allan, I mentioned that you are a former U.S. diplomat. You were on the Iran nuclear negotiating team. You were a big star in the ranks of the department because you were probably the only person who could speak fluent Farsi, and you did messaging to the people of Iran when the U.S. was trying to better reach them. But I failed to mention that currently you are a distinguished diplomatic fellow at the Middle East Institute. But back to the diplomatic part of your portfolio, your CV, Allan. How does it make you feel to have been someone working towards a negotiated settlement on the nuclear program and now see all of that more or less up in smoke?
Well, again, let me just say that I was a very minor part of the U.S. negotiating team. The real stars were people like Wendy Sherman, who led the negotiating team, who was the most impressive diplomat I ever had the honor to work with. And we had a whole range of experts in their relative fields. I was the Iran subject matter expert and also the Persian language spokesperson. But yeah, I mean, these were serious, experienced diplomats focused on trying to get a negotiated solution. In contrast to the Trump administration, where you had no experts with any relevant expertise. And again, the whole mission was entrusted to Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, and I don't know, maybe one or two others. And these people are doubtless very good in their own fields, but you need expertise. As for how I feel about the collapse, the unnecessary collapse of the JCPOA and the resultant chaos that led to this war, Yeah, I feel horrible. But then again, as an American citizen, looking at the footprint and the track record so far of the Trump administration, this war is just one item on a whole long list of consequences of lack of expertise and lack of foregrounding U.S. national interest when you're making political decisions and strategic and economic decisions.
Tell us what you know about the Iranian people, those living in Iran. My experience, having gone over there as a reporter, was that they were very pro American, or at least I encountered a lot of very pro American and pro Western Iranians, which was something I didn't quite expect. But, you know, sort of, you've studied Iran for so long, you know the language, you can follow social media and read Persian. What do you think people don't know about Iranians, and particularly young Iranians, that might be interesting for them to hear from you?
Well, first of all, it's like, I don't know if you're familiar with the old George Orwell analogy of six people in a room, a dark room, feeling different parts of the elephant and guessing about six different beasts based on the part of the elephant they touch. The part of the elephant that Westerners who visit Iran tend to touch is North Tehran, which is very affluent. It's, many of the people speak English, and that's not typical. So again, because people tend to overgeneralize from their experience, a lot of people, a lot of reporters, a lot of Westerners who visit Iran, visit Tehran, visit North Tehran, and get a certain point of view. Here's a key point. There is no useful generalization you can make, I can make, anyone can make about the Iranian people. Okay, like I have expatriates say the Iranian people want this or the Iranian people want that. There are 93 million of these people. There's a full spectrum, right? So, and again, in terms of young people, Iran's not a young country. At the time of the revolution, the median age in Iran was around 18. It's around 35 now. Okay, Iran, due largely to a birth control program started around the time of the revolution, the total fertility index of Iranian females has plunged to appreciably below 2.1, which is the baseline reproduction rate, right? So it's an older population. We can say that, older than in the revolution. But in terms of what Iranians want, I have to assume because they want the same things any population wants. They want a responsive, efficient government that can provide essential goods and services at a reasonable price. Certainly, I'm willing to hazard a guess that many, if not most, of the Iranians don't think their current government is doing that, right? So when you say most Iranians want a new government, that could be true. But what they're willing to do to get that is another question. And I would point out, for example, in the United States right now, our current administration has a 36, 35, whatever, approval rating. So, yeah, I'm willing to cede the point that most Iranians are perhaps profoundly dissatisfied with the current Iranian regime. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're willing to risk anarchy, failed state status, getting shot, economic collapse in the hopes of getting a new one, when to a large extent, there is no Iranian opposition right now in the sense of an organized, effective group that can pose as a realistic alternative to what's ruling Iran right now.
Talk about the let's talk about some players in the government, and then we'll talk more about the opposition. But is there anyone, for example, President Pezeshkian, or any of the old reformers, or someone like Javad Zarif, with whom the United States could reach a negotiated settlement to this war now? I know that they are largely sidelined at this point, or at least the hardliners are in the ascendant, but or in power. But is there any way that you could see some of these more moderates in the Iranian regime being able to sit down at a negotiating table?
No, I mean they're not off to the side. People like Zarif, like Pezeshkian, even though he's the president, they're irrelevant. one of the consequences of this war has been marginalizing or making more irrelevant people like Pezeshkian, people like Zarif, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Beit Rahbari, which is the administrative exoskeleton surrounding the Supreme Leader's office. Those are the only two institutions that matter. Okay, there's no politician in Iran whose power derives from popularity. The last president who could, or the last person who could say that was President Khatami, who was first elected in 1997. Everyone else's power comes from their ability to interact with, to link up with various parts of these elites running Iran. And as a result of this war, it's people like Mojtaba Khamenei or the IRGC. To a large extent, President Trump put Mojtaba Khamenei as supreme leader. He would not have been elected probably had not this war happened. So while there are people who are advocating negotiations with the US, they have zero power right now. The people driving the car in Iran are the hardliners who are fighting for survival and want to bring about a new status quo so that 6 months from now, a year from now, the US and Israel are not mowing the grass by attacking Iran again when Iran tries, as it invariably will, to restore strategic deterrence by rebuilding missiles and by doing other things.
So, do you envision this regime remaining intact?
Yeah, I mean it's changed already. Like I said, this is not the same regime that existed a couple of years ago. It's more militaristic, it's more IRGC focused, it's more hardline. Yeah, they're not going to. I think it unlikely that this regime will collapse. The IRGC, there's, as far as I can tell, no elite defection. They realize that their back is to the water, and they have to both impose massive pain on the world economy and on the US while also suppressing their own people. One of the things that people really aren't focusing on is that Iran has mobilized the IRGC, the Basij, to make sure people don't take to the streets. They're arresting lots of people, executions are way up. So Iran is very aware that due to their inability to provide for the people, even before this war, there's a heightened risk of popular insurrection, but they're really good at suppressing it. And that's one of the things they're doing now, which is why Israel is trying to bomb in those urban centers, those, besieged centers that are responsible for crowd control and population suppression.
I was curious about that, Alan, how much repression is going on right now, given that the regime and its foot soldiers and Basij, IRGC, all of them have their hands full dodging bombs. But you've heard, you understand that the repressive apparatus is able to work simultaneously and has been busy keeping people, average Iranians, down.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I mean, we're bombing Iran a lot, but it's a huge country with 93 million people. So I see videos, which I believe that most or much of Iran is business as usual, right? This is, I mean, just like during World War II, wartime London, people go about their business to the best they can. Life goes on during wartime. So one of the things this regime is still able to do is keep people, keep watching people and ensure that they're off the streets. This is now the longest shutdown of the internet ever in Iran, longer than the protests that happened starting last December until mid-January. So by cutting off the internet, by having troops in the streets, by monitoring what's going on, Iran is waiting and making sure that people don't turn out. And again, people are less likely to turn out as bombs are dropping. It could well be the case that there's a popular protest a week, a month, 3 months after this war winds down. But then I think the Iranian government will still be well positioned to put that down because, unlike the Shah in 1979, as we saw recently, these people are willing to kill thousands of Iranian citizens to stay in power.
I think, Alan, that some people thought that the IRGC was less ideological now than it was when it was founded. And also, I think some people figured, well, the IRGC is all about its business interests at this point and the corruption that goes with that. So perhaps if some sweet deals were offered to some of the more important members of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, they would defect. But you pointed out to me in a recent conversation that actually they're as radicalized as ever, and not just because of the war, but that some of the younger members of the Guard are much more radical than one might think. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, again, different IRGC members have different motivations. Obviously, there's a lot of ideology. They do a lot of ideological trading. But don't forget, these people are part of the economic elite. Okay, they benefit the most from the status quo, and they have the most to lose if the status quo were to change. So that's also part of the reason they're fighting. But it is true that all things being equal, the lower down you go, the more hard line you tend to find IRGC members. Again, the first generation, these are people who fought in the war. They lost friends in the war. Some of them may have traveled abroad when they were younger. But as you get younger and younger, you find more and more IRGC members who are 100% products of the system, raised in the Islamic Republic, trained by IRGC members. So, yeah, they tend to be more hardline.
I've heard some Iranians say, I've listened to some of these call-ins to the opposition television channels like Manitou, and they've said, well, I don't mind that there is some death and destruction going on right now because over the last 47 years, so many Iranians have been killed by this regime. So it seems like obviously it is their way of justifying what's going on in the hopes that tomorrow will be a better day. But what would you say to that argument?
I mean, again, the Iranian diaspora, much like you can't make generalizations about Iranians, it's difficult to make generalizations about the diaspora, but it's certainly the case that so many of them have had their lives brutally disrupted.
TV channel. These are not diaspora Iranians. These are Iranians in Iran who've said things like this.
Yeah, again, I'm sure there are many Iranians who are willing to risk the lives of other Iranians in the hopes of a better future. And there are some Iranians willing to risk their own lives to in the hopes of a better future. We saw this in the demonstrations that lasted December 28th and lasted until mid-January, where anywhere from 9 to, I don't know, 30,000 Iranians were killed by the regime. So, yes, certainly there is dissatisfaction and hatred of this regime. And many of those who have this dissatisfaction and hatred are willing to put their lives on the line. The question is, anger is not enough. You have to have organization. And because the Islamic Republic of Iran is so good at neutralizing internal suppression, there really is no organization inside Iran that's willing to take on this regime and have a good chance. Like during the 79 revolution, you had unions who were going on strike. You had the mosque network. You had the bazaris, the merchants, all of whom were mobilized and organized to put down the Shah. That's not true with unions now. The bazaris, the merchant class, are far less significant and certainly not as opposed to the current regime. So, organization matters. You can't, as Suzanne Maloney of the Brookings Institute said, you cannot bomb Iran into a democracy.
Allan, what are you hearing in Washington among your friends, like-minded people, colleagues and former colleagues?
Well, again, one of the distinguishing characteristics of this war is that the State Department was not called on at all in the build up to it, nor is it being used in any real fashion now. As it's being implemented, the sidelining of expertise in foreign policy is a characteristic of the Trump administration. It used to be that you had this whole huge analytical apparatus that gathered information, analyzed it, thought of policy options, and presented them to the highest level where decisions were made. That's no longer the case. The way it is now is all the policy process happens at the highest level. You have a handful of people, President Trump and those people who are close to him due to reasons of personal loyalty, friendship, and they're the ones making these decisions, based on their gut, based on what someone told them, based on magical thinking, and then they say, let's do X. And that's when the policy process kicks in because then everyone implements it.
Last question for you, Allan. What does the United States owe the Iranian people? And I guess related to this, if you were calling the shots right now, how would you wrap this situation up?
Well, it's a peculiarly American misconception to think every problem has a solution. We have so blotted our copybook in the Middle East, especially with Iran, that there is no way this can be fixed, at least in a time frame that, under decades. So, I mean, my policy recommendation would be it's like the physician's oath: first, do no harm. First, do no more harm, which means just stop. Stop bombing. We're not going to be able, without taking over the Iranian coast, of keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. Um, there's massive regional energy infrastructure at risk if we choose to retaliate either by taking Kharg Island or by trying to seize the Iranian coast in the hopes of keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. So we started a war based on miscalculation, and we just need to stop it as soon as possible. And we need to force Israel to stop it. Because don't forget, much as Israel was one of the main reasons this war started, if we stop, Israel could still keep going. And even if we stop, it still could be the case that Iran will keep going, at least for a while, because it needs to prove a point, which is you cannot attack Iran with impunity. And they had lost all their strategic deterrence before this war, and they're desperate to find a new way of establishing or reestablishing their lost strategic deterrence. So there is no good solution here. The damage we have done to our allies in the region, the Gulf countries, and the damage we have done in terms of the reputational damage, uh, the goodwill we had with the Iranian people, I think has been severely damaged. Um, so maybe we just need to as President Trump has said, we should do it. If you look at last year's national security strategy, he said the Middle East is not that important as long as there's the free flow of oil. We need to focus on Asia, right? This is the whole pivot to the east that successive administrations have been talking about. This war is contrary not just to common sense, but to President Trump's own stated strategic objectives. So maybe we just need to minimize our focus on the Middle East, hope that Iran can interact with its Gulf neighbors, who it has significantly alienated, and see if they can find some sort of collective modus vivendi. There really is no neat solution to this, but the essential prerequisite is to stop making it worse.
Allan Eyre, thank you so much, our former U.S. diplomat and Persian speaker, Farsi speaker, and of the Middle East Institute. Thank you, Allan.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for asking me on.